Over the weekend, there were 312 gun violence incidents that occurred across this country. And it raises concern over gun reform, over hate crimes, over domestic terrorist attacks, this American plague of gun violence. For more, ABC's Kenneth Moten and former FBI agent Brad Garrett joins us now. So, Brad, you know, it's great to see you, but it seems like we do see you on days like this because you are helpful in understanding this dimension of it. This idea of replacement theory that is now specified in this one as what apparently motivated the shooter in Buffalo. What stands out to you about the profile of this suspect?
So, Terry, every mass shooter is driven by one typically singular thing. It's rage, it's revenge, and it's also targeted, in this case, obviously towards African Americans. And it makes it easy for the mass shooter because he or she locks on to a particular event. And then they let that event manifest. Then they talk about it online. Then they get into chat rooms and talk about it. And we've reached a point in this country where you can find something hate-filled that fits your message and basically let it grow. And I think that's exactly what happened with this shooter. COVID may have had something to do with it, only because it facilitated his ability maybe to stay online longer, obviously. But, you know, the tricky part of this clearly is you can say almost anything you want to say online as long as it is not a specific threat. And therein lies the issue. You can't monitor people like him only because there are hundreds and thousands of versions of him that aren't going to commit mass shootings or harm anybody, but they're going to talk in this hateful rage. And so it really is a huge dilemma for law enforcement to figure out who's going to shoot, who's not going to shoot. And it goes even beyond mass shooters in reality of keeping track of, you know, would-be violent people. And law enforcement really is at the mercy of the public giving them information. And that's how many mass shootings that you and I don't talk about, but law enforcement intervenes days, maybe hours before a kid enters a school to shoot it up. And that's unfortunately what you really need.
And that is what happened. I want to follow up with, on that, Brad, which is that we spoke with the commissioner of the Buffalo Police Department just now, and you know, he has said that this shooter it was not on their radar. The guy lived 300 miles away, but apparently he did make the shooter concerning threats previously towards his high school. And shouldn't that have been a red flag to someone about purchasing weapons, about maybe getting on them? It seems at this point in American history, if a kid says, you know, I'd like to shoot some people at my high school, maybe we need to be a lot more aggressive in that kind of response. What do you think?
So I don't disagree with that, but herein lies the problem in that people make veiled threats online depending on what their orientation, whatever they've hooked onto, as we talked about a few minutes ago. And that's, you know, what they will run with. But the problem is, if it's not specific, in other words, that I'm going to this location and I'm going to shoot this person or this classroom or this business, whatever it might be, it's just a veiled threat. If you go back, and we don't know a lot about what happened back when he was a senior in high school, it was obviously disturbing enough that the New York State Police conducted an investigation. It appears they did some sort of mental evaluation. But unless you're adjudicated mentally ill, you can't really stop people from purchasing firearms. Now, New York, like many states, or some states, not many, have red flag laws where if you can convince a judge that somebody is a threat to themselves or the community, you can go seize their guns temporarily. Should that have been done in this case? I think so. But again, law enforcement would have to know that. It goes back to that dilemma of you can't monitor everybody, and you're at the mercy of people coming forward and telling you what's going on. That's not adequate, but that is reality.
And Kenneth, earlier today, civil rights attorney Ben Crump spoke about the need for a black hate crime law. Let's take a listen to what he said and react.
Maybe we can finally get the anti-black hate crime bill passed in the United States Congress in the spirit of these lost lives here in Buffalo, New York. We are imploring President Biden to use whatever influence he has to tell America we need to pass this bill because black America is suffering right now.
And he follows up by saying it's only right. Kenneth, is there room for lawmakers to do more here, and where do they stand at this point on this issue?
Yeah, there's definitely room for lawmakers here in Washington to do more, and for lawmakers in the states to do more as well. When it comes to that anti-lynching law, it does cover hate crimes. Does it prevent hate crimes? Does it deter hate crimes? Unfortunately, in this act of this heinous crime and this racist attack in Buffalo, unfortunately, it did not. But I can say that whether or not it could be a factor in this case, that remains to be seen, because there are enough laws on the books already for local and federal authorities to go after this gunman. Significant gun reform legislation, Kira, has been tied up in politics for so long here in Washington, and it's something that we cover every single time we see one of these horrific acts here, one of these mass shootings, expanding background checks, imposing other safeguards for buying a gun, more states enacting red flag laws to take away guns from a person deemed to be dangerous to prevent suicides, domestic violence, and, of course, mass shootings. Those are all things that can be done here in Washington and in the states as well. Republicans remained opposed against them and against many of these measures, citing the Second Amendment.
So, Brad, I want to ask you about the apparent motivation of this shooting, this insane replacement theory, white panic, basically, about the nature of the demography of this country or Europe or whatever. It arises out of the sewers of the internet, right? Spills into chat rooms and into social media, eventually ends up on Fox News. And I just wondered, does the FBI, or how would the FBI, or is there a law that empowers FBI or federal officials to monitor for this kind of hateful planning? It's essentially a campaign, almost a political campaign, to recruit followers, to a call to action that this guy took literally. And I just wonder, does the government monitor that? There are obviously First Amendment issues on that, and could we do more? What do you think?
I think we can only do more if we have information that an individual or a group are going to do something unlawful, obviously some violent crime, because that's what we're talking about. But when you get beyond that, Terry, I mean, think about probably the hundreds of thousands of people in this country that believe in replacement theory. And a lot of that's driven, obviously, by some politicians. You've already talked about it, online. And people drop into channels, in other words, channels of thinking, where if you're into this replacement theory, white supremacy, the white society is being pushed out by folks of color, African American, you name it, that they feel justified in taking on the rest of society that doesn't fit their model. And so I don't know what you easily do about that, because they're being, in my view, sort of encouraged by public figures to think that way. Maybe not directly, but certainly in an indirect way. And if you go into any Midwestern Rust Belt, for lack of a better term, city, you're going to find a percentage of these folks because they feel like their life is over. And that's what's driving a lot of this type of thinking.
And you're absolutely right. A lot of people making a lot of money in this country, making people filled with hate and anger and desperation. And that's a money-making proposal for some very prominent people. Brad, Kenneth, thanks very much for helping us understand this terrible incident. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.